Before we get into the video, I just want to give a big shout out to Amazon and the Amazon Appstore for once again sponsoring this video. And I'd like to tell you a bit about Echoes of Mana, which is just released this week on all app stores including the Amazon Appstore. And the Amazon Appstore is the absolute best place to download and play the game right now because they're running a special promotion in celebration of the game's launch. If you spend $100 or 10,000 Amazon coins, you'll get another 1,000 coins back. That's right, just a straight up rebate that you can use for even more rolling. And if you do as much rolling as I do, that's a pretty good deal. All you need to do to take advantage of this offer is to download Amazon Appstore app on your Android phone, install Echoes of Mana, make an account, and purchase 10,000 Amazon coins to get those 1,000 coins back. I'll include a link in the description and pinned comment down below to the Amazon store page, which outlines the whole process. Now for those of you who aren't in the know, if Echoes of Mana sounds familiar to you, it should, because it's the latest release in the Mana series from Square Enix, which has been producing classic JRPG hits like Secrets of Mana and Trials of Mana since the SNES days. And Echoes of Mana not only features fan-favorite characters from all of the Mana games, but also retains the absolutely beautiful and unique art style that the series is known for. As you can see from the trailer, the game looks great and has that classic JRPG feel. So if you're a fan of the Mana series, or if you just love JRPGs, then I highly recommend heading over to the Amazon Appstore and downloading Echoes of Mana. And again, the link to all of this will be in the description and pinned comment down below, so do check it out. But for now, on to the video. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here with, I guess, part 2 of this little mini-series. FGOJP has been pumping out a ton of strengthening quests lately, and last time I gave you my thoughts on which SSR servants I think are likely to be buffed this year, so it's only fair for me to give my SR predictions as well. We'll be taking a look at the 4-star servants that I think are most likely to get a buff to help them out, and also give some speculation as to what kind of buff would be best for them. In other words, this is going to be a kind of prediction video. So if you're looking forward to these predictions, please do consider subscribing to the channel and ringing that bell, since it helps us out a lot. And you can stay up to date with new FGO content as it comes out. And with that said, let's take a look at the list. Right off the bat, I just want to say picking SR servants to buff was a lot harder to do than 5 stars. Mostly because there are a lot more of them and their power levels vary wildly compared to the 5-star servants. So my criteria for determining which SRs would get buffed partially consisted of which ones are most due for one. And Liang Yu is long overdue in that department. Since her release nearly 4 years ago, she has not received a single buff, and her kit, while very unique, is a little bit outdated and wildly impractical. And with most of the other SR Lancers already having received buffs or not needing them, I think that Liang Yu is the perfect surprise buff candidate for a strengthening campaign that will make everyone say, oh yeah, I forgot that servant existed. As for what can be buffed on her, she definitely needs a more cohesive Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm has a bunch of effects, but they only trigger under very certain conditions, like when she's attacked or when she crits. But she has no way of guaranteeing those outcomes, which makes her Noble Phantasm very inconsistent and in need of a massive rework. And I have just the solution. With the addition of Bizet into FGO, we now have a full-on counter system that can be built into a servant's NP. And I think this is exactly what Liang Yu needs. Upgrade her Noble Phantasm to include a 1-turn taunt, as well as a counterattack every time that she's hit by an enemy, just like Bizet. These counterattacks should then proc all of the debuffs on Liang Yu's NP for each hit, so defense down, buff removal, and crit chance down. This would make Liang Yu's Noble Phantasm way more consistent, and give her a nice bit of utility for boss fights, where she can function as a debuff tank. The taunt would also synergize perfectly with her debuff immunity and guts to protect the party from all types of damage and debuffs while still providing some offensive capability. And just like Liang Yu, Seiba has been in the game for ages and not received a single buff. Seiba has been around since before the Lost Belts, and unlike Liang Yu, Seiba has actually been a fairly popular servant, appearing in multiple events with regular speaking roles, and even featured on craft essences and promotional material. So it is kind of odd that such a relatively popular character hasn't received a buff, despite having so many opportunities to do so. Part of that may be because Seiba is already a decently good servant, or at least she was at release. But nowadays she has been slightly power crept. Luckily for her though, Lisango has been really fixated on offensive casters lately, with 3 new servants in the past year being offensive casters, which up until now has been a very uncommon role. If that trend continues, it seems very likely that some of the older DPS casters will get an upgrade as well. And given Seiba's popularity and regular event appearances, I'd bet that she'd be first on that list of caster revamps. And buffing Seiba would be all too easy. All she really needs is more damage. Her kit is outdated, so she could benefit from a skill buff, but first and foremost, I think she'd benefit most from a straight up NP buff. Just a higher damage modifier would be enough to improve her position greatly. But I would love it if Lysango also threw in a star bomb, something like 25 or 30 crit stars. That way she could set up her crit buff next turn and deal a ton more follow-up damage. Okay, by now I'm sure you're tired of hearing me say this, but oh my god, it's been 4 years and this servant has never been buffed. This is the last one, I swear. But with Lanling, it's less about the fact that he hasn't been buffed yet, and more about the direction that FGO is headed with its meta, and of course his popularity. It also helps that Lanling is a Saber, and Saber servants tend to get buffed very frequently. Lanling is a popular character both in terms of gameplay and being a fan favorite. He's also been featured in other events, and he even has a summer ult. On top of that though, FGO has also been trying to improve skills that depend on RNG, either by eliminating the RNG or making the skill more powerful to compensate for it. For example, see the buffs to Helena, Wu, and Tesla. Lysango has also been doing a lot to try and buff crits as well, and Lanling is the perfect intersection of these efforts, because with one buff, his RNG based skill can be fixed and he can become an even better crit support as well, not to mention being an excellent NP battery. Now I want to stress that Lanling doesn't really need a buff, but that's never stopped Lysango before. So if he were to be buffed, I'd actually like to see that buff go to his NP charge skill. Rather than being targeted to one ally, I think it should be a party-wide buff. This would fix several issues with Lanling. Firstly, it would eliminate the RNG from his third skill, since the buff success rate would apply to the whole party, which means that you would no longer have to choose between providing NP charge to an ally or buffing their crit damage. This alone would make Lanling way more powerful as a crit support, but even better than that, he would also be able to provide a 20% battery to 2 allies, along with his arts buff, which would make him an even more useful NP battery. My next pick may seem a little weird at first, but I promise it'll make total sense in a moment. Of course, Rider Ishtar is an unconventional candidate for a buff, because not only is she a summer servant, which rarely ever get buffed, but she's also a welfare, which somehow see even less buffs than summer servants. That said though, I'm almost certain that we're going to get a Rider Ishtar buff this year, or at least as certain as I can be, which is not very. The reason being that we just had a wave of buffs for summer servants like Summer Tamamo, Ann and Mary, and Helena, who all just got buffed this month. But we're still 4 months away from summer, and April is an odd time to plan buffs for summer servants. Unless of course you're planning for more later on. Yes, I think there's a high likelihood that we're going to get another wave of summer servant buffs this year. Otherwise, it doesn't really make that much sense to release the buffs 4 months away from summer. And in that theoretical second wave of summer buffs, it would be very likely that Ishtar would get an upgrade to her Summer Breaker skill, because after all, it's the same exact skill that Summer Tamamo just got buffed. And if you're going to revamp the skill and remove the demerit from one servant, it only makes sense to do that across the board for the other servant who has the same skill. So in my opinion, it seems less a matter of if and more a matter of when Ishtar is going to get this buff. And I think it'll play out exactly the same as with Tamamo's. Remove the stun demerit, add a 30% NP charge, and increase the crit damage and star gen buffs to 3 turns. As a quick rider though, Summer Ishtar can benefit even more from these buffs than Summer Tamamo, since due to her high star weight and already strong star generating, she would have no issue critting constantly. Not to mention the 50% NP gain up and 30% NP charge would make her an even better looper. Summer Rin could very well go from mid-tier welfare to Kintoki or Kuro tier with such a buff. And finally, the servant that I think is overwhelmingly most likely to be buffed this year is Saber Alter. Pretty much for all the reasons I laid out above and then some. I know I said that Seiba and Lanling were popular characters, but Salter is clearly in another stratosphere when it comes to popularity. Not only is she a variant on the literal face of the franchise, but she may be the most popular Saber variant. Add to that she has her roots in the original VN, and she has numerous anime appearances, promotions, and marketing campaigns centered around her, and you have one popular servant. But she's also a servant that hasn't seen a buff in quite a while, and she's fallen victim to tremendous power creep. And if there's one thing Nasu doesn't like, it's when Artoria gets power crept. It seems we always get at least 1 or 2 Artoria related buffs every year, so it could be Salter's time. but my biggest reason for believing her buff is incoming is because she's one of the few servants who still has an unbuffed charisma skill below rank B. Salter's charisma is by far the worst in the game, granting only a measly 12% attack buff for the party, which means it's only half as strong as the average charisma skill, let alone a good charisma skill, which usually provides a 40% attack buff. Now obviously, given her lore, Salter isn't supposed to be the most charismatic leader, and the skill reflects that. But for the sake of gameplay, it does need to be buffed. So in keeping with her lore, I think a fun idea would be to have her charisma skill buffed to the standard 20%, but also have a secondary effect where she drains 500 HP from her allies as a demerit to further buff her attack by another 20%. This would make it sort of a selfish charisma whereby Salter hurts her allies to make herself stronger. It would be an interesting kind of reverse charisma to reflect Seiba Alter's lore, while also serving to be a much stronger buff for elevating her damage. And those are my predictions for which SR servants I think are likely to get buffs this year. If you enjoyed it and want to see more of this type of video, please do leave a like and consider subscribing, and let me know what your top 5 predictions for SR buffs this year are in the comments down below. And until next time, this is Soberoni signing out. Later.